Hello Magic Gathering players, this is Maelstrom MTG. Today we are going to be covering quite a few decks that I have been brewing in the background. Some of them are inspired by other people, some of them are my own creation, but all of them I have play tested. I have gone through all this work to just put all these decks together. I have a summer job working at a summer camp, and so I'm thinking that the likelihood of me creating content during that time is probably very low, but I will try to see at some point if I can get stuff going. But likelihood is that this will be one of my last chance, or these next 2 weeks while I quarantine, in order to be able to, or isolate rather, in order to go work there. I might be able to do some videos there. But I wanted to give you kind of a last huzzah before the summer, at least one quality video, at least in terms of my content. Not a high bar, but I'll do my best. So I want to go through a lot of different decks that are not necessarily budget. There really aren't a lot, which is why I'm shoving this all into one video, because my thing is really kind of budget decks. Like that's my thing. But with the new Modern Horizons 2 set coming out, where nothing is going to be budget from that set, really nothing is going to be budget, it's hard for me as a modern player not to make content on it. And so instead of limiting myself to a budget, I decided to show you what kind of decks I brew when a new set comes out, when I'm not limited by a budget. When you do this, you can take your list and see, okay, do I really need all of these lands, or do I really need all of these cards? What's important here? And so that's kind of what you look at, and you can cut things to make it less expensive. But there are certain things that I'm just really excited about that need that extra cash that won't be considered budget. So for this video, I will not be doing a budget video. Rather, I'll be covering several different decks, not super big deck text of each of them, because I don't want it to be several hour long video. But I would like, in the next 2 weeks with my quarantining, I would like to possibly record videos of me playing some of these decks and showing you how they're played. But I just want to start off with this first deck, Domain Zoo. We've seen a lot of different decks like this come out in the past few days. I've taken a step back from producing videos, or not producing, but recording videos in the first few days. I didn't do anything during the different previews, but I did do the one grief video. But I wanted to just show them all because it's awesome what you can do with this set. So first deck we have Territorial Kavu, which is a domain card where its power and toughness are each equal to the number of basic land types among lands you control. Now, the ruling on this is that basic land types include they include plains, island, swamp, mountain, and forest, and do not include waste. So I know that waste is technically a basic land, but it's not included in the domain. So for all the people who might be considering putting this in a deck that also have wastes in it, don't. It won't pump it up to a 6/6. But the idea is that you can pump this up to possibly even a 5/5 on turn 2. But there are also cards in the deck that get benefits from having different types of lands, or we can really get a sense of just almost a 5-color good stuff deck. So we also have Scion of Draco, which is a 12-drop 4/4 that costs 2 less for each basic land type, the same types, but then each creature you control has Vigilance if it's white, Hexproof if it's blue, Lifelink if it's black, First Strike if it's red, and Trample if it's green. So you're going to be pumping up your entire team. So what we wanted to do here is we kind of wanted to get, Shardless Agent to grab a lot of different stuff we could get in our deck. We wanted Mantis Rider because that means that it'll have flying, Vigilance, Haste, Hexproof, First Strike, and Vigilance, which I think it already has. So it'll have a lot of abilities for 3 mana, and so that is something that's very powerful. And so I'm really happy with this card in this deck. At first I was like, is it really going to be good enough? And then it really was. It really was. Turn 2 Scion into a turn 3 Mantis Rider is not bad at all. We have Renin 6 as a 2-drop that we can grab with Shardless, but also because it is a very, very powerful card, especially with fetch lands and us trying to get our different land types. We have Snapcaster Mage to be able to cast any of our spells in our graveyard. There is the chance that you Snapcaster off of Shardless or Noble Hierarch off of Shardless, and that does feel bad. That did happen to me. I did Snapcaster with no open mana, but I was just so ahead in that game, it didn't matter. So we have Lightning Bolt, we have Lightning Helix, Metamorphose. We have that, but really the spotlight is on Tribal Flames, where it deals X damage to any target equal to the number of basic land types you have. So if you have all 5, that's 5 mana. Well, 5 damage for 2 mana. And so that is a very powerful card. The sideboard has some typical hate you might see, and then the lands. Something important to notice is that we have Triomes. Now, I do have 2 different variations of this deck, but the Triome is able to give us 3 different types. So if we Triome on turn 1 into a Shock Land on turn 2, then that means that we have up to 5 colors on turn 2, which does help us with Draco. It does help us with Kavu. Hierarch is able to say, let's shock on turn 1 and Hierarch, and then turn 2 we play Triome tapped, and we can still cast our Kavu, we can still cast our Draco. So that's something I wanted to point out, is that we have multiple ways of getting Kavu out on turn 2 or Draco. But the problem was that with this variation, I really liked the Snapcaster, but the mana base wasn't as efficient as this deck, which is essentially the same deck, but you have in addition you have 4 Ignoble instead of 4 Noble, and then you just have the 2, but you're adding in General Ferris Rockerick, which has hexproof for monocolored, and whenever you cast a multicolored spell, create a 4/4. Now, Aspiring Spike had a very similar list, but essentially you can cast any of these multicolored spells, which you do have. You have a 5-color mana base, and you're going to be able to get an insane amount of 4/4s. So if you cast this and then you follow it up with a Bloodbraid Elf that happens to hit a Shardless Ancient, that happens to hit literally anything other than your Hierarchs and, well, I guess your removal spells. Even if you hit a removal spell, I wouldn't even complain about that. But if you hit one of these, it kind of feels bad. But if you hit any other 2 or 1-drop that is a creature, you're going to be getting another token. But then you still have the Scion Draco and Kavu. You still have that plan. You still have the Renin 6 for extra removal and something you can hit. Then you have Lightning Bolt, Lightning Helix, Tribal Flames. That's removal. Same as the other deck. The main difference, really, I would say, despite the actual, like, non-land difference, like, we have quite a few changes in the deck. I would say, by the way, real quick, all of these deck lists are going to be in the description. But I'd say the biggest difference is that we have Savai Triome, and Savai Triome really isn't reasonable in the other list, just because you needed that color. Like, you needed the other colors. So you couldn't argue to even run one Savai Triome. It was too much. So with this, it's going to be able to do Triome on turn 1, and then fetch like a Breeding Pool on turn 2, and then you have, like, that is a very, very good way to get that Scion Draco or Kavu on turn 2. The problem with the other things is that you just can't have a green Triome. This list only runs one Triome, and you just can't have a green one. Because if you do, then you're not getting your turn 2 Kavu or Draco without a hierarch. Anyway, and then the sideboard is actually different because the cards in this deck are different. The mana base actually is reliant on, for example, Rockerick. Like, switching to Rockerick instead of Snapcaster made switching to this Triome more reasonable. Next up is Persist Control, and I made a Dimir Control list earlier this year, and I really enjoyed that deck. And so this is essentially the same thing. You still got the Fatal Push plan, you still got the Thoughtseize plan, you're adding Counterspell, you're keeping Archmage's Charm, you're keeping Force of Negation, Cryptic Command. Honestly, if you wanted to take my old Dimir Control list that is somewhere in my Modern on Budget section of my channel, you could easily just bring in the new changes from Modern Horizons 2. And the new changes consist of adding Counterspell, which I did take out Mana Leak because Counterspell, though it's blue-blue instead of 1 and a blue, Counterspell is strictly better. And so you could just do that. You could run the 1 Cryptic. Cryptic is pretty expensive now, so I could honestly see you just going like between like 2 Spell Snare and then 2 Spell Snare and then 2 Mana Leak, or there's a really good new card called Lose Focus, and so it's a quench but has replicate. But the idea of this deck is very similar to my original list, except it's running Snapcasters because it's not budget anymore, but also it's running Unmarked Grave. Search your library for a non-legendary card, put it in your graveyard, then shuffle. So the idea is you grab Grave Titan, Wormcoil, or Archon of Cruelty. And so once you do that, you can also persist, returning one of them to the battlefield. So you're cheating on this mana, and so that we can get a faster game plan. And so Grave Titan, when it enters or attacks, create 2 zombies. Are they tapped? No, they're not. So you can even use them as blockers. Then you have Wormcoil, which when it dies, you create 2 tokens. Then, by the way, really good tokens. Archon of Cruelty, whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, target opponent sacks a creature or planeswalker, discards a card, and loses 3 life. You draw a card and gain 3 life. This is my go-to if I'm trying to grab something. I would say the order that you want to grab stuff is so Archon into Grave Titan into a Wormcoil, but sometimes you'll need that lifelink, which is why it's in here. If you drop a Wormcoil, it hard stops any prowess deck. So this is going to be very strong. And so you can just persist, return it to the battlefield with the -1/-1 counter, and you get all of that stuff. Another insane thing you do with this deck, which I almost considered putting Thoughtseize to a 4 of in here, is that you can play Thoughtseize, targeting yourself, discarding any of these cards if they're in your starting hand, following it up with a Persist on turn 2. And if you do a Persist on turn 2, then you get one of these on turn 2. You're beating Tron to their Wormcoil engine, or you're just playing any of these. It's very powerful. The rest of it is an average control package. The sideboard, once again, is going to be a lot of just situational stuff. Bitter Blossom, if you need a different win condition, you aren't really losing a ton of life to Wormcoil engine to Bitter Blossom because of Wormcoil engine, but it's just in there as an additional win condition. Green-White Valakut, it's essentially your average Primeval Titan deck, but instead of trying to win with specifically Primeval Titan, we are going towards the plan of Valakut. Typically, we try to do things with our lands, and I really am going hard into the win condition of Valakut, because we have Titania, Protector of Argoth, that when it enters the battlefield, return a land from your graveyard to the battlefield. Whenever a land is put in a graveyard, create a 5/3 green elemental. Now, I wanted to put a different Modern Horizons card, or not a different, but a Modern Horizons card in each of these decks. And this is a very powerful card, because they're going to be worrying about Primeval Titan, but the moment you play Titania, they're going to be extremely worried, because we are going to be trying to search our Valakuts. If they destroy our Valakut, Titania can bring it back, or we can sack a Forest or a Plains to go tutor for any card in our deck, any land. For example, Valakut. Same with Elvish Reclaimer. Tap 2, sack a land, search your library for a land card, put it on the battlefield tapped. And so both of these get pumped up for lands in your graveyards, but they can both search for Valakut. Primeval Titan can search for Valakut. These two cards synergize with Titania because they are able to sacrifice our lands to create 5/3 elementals. And so Valakut is going to be a way we can win just right off. Like, we can just... It's not going to be some sort of, like, Scapeshift deck. This is not the kind of deck for that, where you win all at once. It's going to be the kind of deck that you win by a few Valakuts per turn. It's going to be a little grindier, but I think it's going to be a safer plan. I think it's definitely a safer plan, because it was always a chance that you just got your Scapeshift countered, where these, it's hard to just say, you know what, these are going to get countered. Alright, well, the rest of the deck has some different utility lands, some ramp lands, and then the sideboard's got a lot of just ways to deal with different things that will try to stop us. Next up is the Cat combo, which is a deck I just love and hate. I love to hate it. It's Felidar Guardian mixing with Saheeli Rai, which, if you don't understand, Saheeli Rai can minus to create a hasted copy of Felidar Guardian. And so if you do that, Felidar Guardian, the token, enters, exiling Saheeli, having her re-enter fresh with new loyalty, so you can activate it again, -2 to create another copy of the Felidar Guardian. And so you just create an infinite amount of Felidar Guardians, because you start flickering your Saheeli with the Enter the Battlefield ability, and every time Saheeli re-enters, you can reactivate her ability to make a token that's a copy of Felidar Guardian. The rest of the deck, I know there's an Aether Vial in here, and Aether Vial is really the flex spot. I really wanted it in here as a way to just try to avoid any kind of tricky situations that you might run into of people trying to stop what you're doing. But you could easily just take it out. I'm not really sure how I feel about Aether Vial. I only gave myself a little bit of time per deck. This is a deck I already know very well. I've played it in the past at several points. I think the Aether Vial is really, if you wanted to put... I wanted Force of Negation, but I realized that that's not plausible with the number of white cards in our deck. So Aether Vial, it's great, but might not be what we need. But the rest of the deck is Auriok Champion for Pro Black and Red, gives us infinite life off of Felidar Guardian, or gives us a lot of life off of our opponent's creatures. Charming Prince gives us utility, but also gives us flickering. Glasspool Mimic gives us copying. Imperial Recruiter gives us tutoring. Skyclave Apparition gives us removal. Felidar Guardian is going to be our win condition. And Solitude is going to be our way of adding more removal, adding more validity, making this deck a little scarier. And what we can do is we can actually ephemerate our own Solitude. So if we do want to flicker this, that's great. The thing about this deck, though, which makes me really want to run Ephemerate, is the fact that there are other Enter the Battlefield abilities. It's not in here only for Solitude, which you'll notice in some of my decks is the case. But you flicker your Solitude in response to the Evoke in order to keep your creature. So on turn 1, you could get 2 Swords to Plowshares. Likelihood is you wait and play this later, but this is something very powerful. Next up is Food with Hollow One. Hollow One is a deck. It was my first modern deck ever. Was a very janky mono red burn deck I built with my brother. My next one was Hollow One, which I actually built before it actually got popular, before people knew about it. I was like, Hollow One looks cool. What are cards that are like there's got to be a way I can get this out on turn 1. So I started looking up like 1-drop, like draw cards, discard cards. I originally started with 1-drop discard cards, and I built a deck with one with nothing. But I eventually found this on Gatherer and Burning Inquiry, and I was like, wow, 4 Hollow Ones on turn 1. That seems powerful. But the rest of the deck is it's very much how I remember it. I'm not sure how I feel about the headliner, but it's not bad. Flameblade Adept is Menace, still really good, but you're getting pumped up every time you discard. You have Bloodghast to come back from your graveyard, Flamewing Phoenix to come back from your graveyard. You have a lot of stuff to make use of your graveyard. Squeak can come back every turn, and that's there for a reason. But the new addition to the deck is Azmoraina Mardikadestina Kuldakar. And this card, which I dedicated like a solid 2 days to just randomly, just while I was with my girlfriend even, she was like, what are you doing? And then she realized, oh wait. And then she started getting in on it too. And she started racing me to try to say Azmoraina Mardikadestina Kuldakar. And then we ended up trying to create a D&D character named Sir Reginald Azmoraina Mardikadestina Kuldakar Pippin Padaloxocopolis III. And that is a mouthful. Let me just say, I am really impressed that I actually said all of what I just said without stuttering. And so, Azmoraina Mardikadestina Kuldakar is going to be a card that we can just Street Wraith on turn 1 to play this. And so, that's very powerful. Having Azmoraina Mardikadestina Kuldakar on the battlefield on turn 1 is... It's dumb. I'm gonna tell you, it's dumb. In fact, like, its removal, it tutors, and this is something very powerful that I just want to show you. It's a 3/3 that you can play on turn 1, but you can play Underworld Cookbook and then discard a card to create a food token, and all the food tokens are going to be able to, using her ability to sack foods, deal 6 damage to a creature. Like, that's really powerful that you can just create food out of nowhere. You don't even need it to be like a food deck. Heck, you have Squee Goblin Nabob in here, which people say, oh no, he's just bad, or he's just not playable. But if you return 1 Squee to your hand every turn, your Underworld Cookbook suddenly turns into something that you can just tap every turn with no downside. Every turn, just return Squee and tap Underworld Cookbook. Street Wraith makes Azmoraina Mardikadestina Kuldakar playable on the first turn, but otherwise you can play her pretty early on in the game. I'm only running 17 lands. I like it that way, and the sideboard is very straightforward. It's a lot of general hate. Next up is the same concept of having Azmoraina Mardikadestina Kuldakar in the lists, but it's also running Blazing Rootwalla, which is a Madness 0. It's running Hollow One, which can be a 0-drop. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to turn 1 Burning Inquiry to discard your Vengevines, discard your Rootwallas. Obviously, it's random, but those are the ones you're hoping. And what you can do is, if you do that and just you discard Vengevines on turn 1, discard at least 1 Rootwalla, what's going to happen is that you can also play Hollow One for free at that point. So you get Hollow One, you get any Vengevines you discarded, because that's your second spell you cast, because Rootwallas are 0-drops. And you get a lot of power on turn 1. And that's something I'm not sure people are going to be able to stop very easily. Then we have Seasoned Pyromancer for additional discard stuff. I really like the idea of just discarding Rootwalla to like half the things in this deck to be able to get a free cast. Really kind of reminds me of like, this is Hollow One's version of Narcomoeba, Blazing Rootwalla is. So Seasoned Pyromancer is doing amazing work in this deck, and I love the fact that we have Seasoned Pyromancer alongside of Azmoraina Mardikadestina Kuldakar, and I messed up that one, and Underworld Cookbook. It's kind of like it's food, you're cooking, it's just the general theme, and so I'm really enjoying it. And then you have your salad over here with Vengevine. It's a salad, right? This time, though, we did go up to 18 lands because it's a little higher in what we're trying to do. It's not as devoted into the Hollow One as it is into the Vengevine and discard, but they are slightly different. They are slightly different decks. I look forward to seeing what these do in Modern. I enjoyed playing them both thoroughly. The sideboard has some more stuff that you can transition into either some Evoke stuff, some more Graveyard shenanigans, or some general hate cards. Ephemerate combo is going to be something that I think, yeah, no. So I took Magic Aid's deck of Grief and Solitude, and so if you want to have a very good description of the deck, go pay attention to him, go watch his video. It does an amazing job of showing the power level of this deck. The only thing I wanted to do is I went down on some Vindicates and on, I don't even remember what else I went down on, but I really wanted Chancellor of the Annex because I want to be able to do this on turn 1 and have it where they can't cast anything, because it's getting kind of dumb with what you can do with Modern Horizons 2. And then you can just ditch this to Solitude. And a lot of other things in here have different shenanigans you can pull. The only stuff that there aren't shenanigans with the new Evoke creatures or Ephemerate or anything like that is Giver of Runes, and that just protects your stuff. You eventually can go grab Cauldron Compleat and basically just win the game from there. This deck, if you Grief on turn 1 with an Ephemerate, then you're going to get 3 Thoughtseizes. Endurance Collector is a Pelt Collector deck and an Experiment 1 deck where whenever something enters or leaves with greater power, it gets a counter. So you have cards like Vexing Devil, which typically, unless your opponent has removal, they're going to remove. But if they do if they do have removal, it's going to die anyway, so Pelt Collector will still get pumped up. And then we have Wild Nicodle for more pumping up. I didn't want the Kavu in here just because it tried to go a little too far away from my game plan. Burning Tree Emissary, because Burning Tree on turn 2... No, I think I made a last-second edit to this deck where I wasn't paying attention. Maybe I was just speaking out of... talking for talking's sake. I do have Kavu in here, just not as good. It's just such a good card, I guess. I thought I took it out. I guess I didn't. I don't really know how I feel about it in this list, because it doesn't get to insane power and toughness, but it does have the attack trigger, so I don't know. I made this deck at some point at like 3 or 4 in the morning, and I guess I never edited it. My final version, I think I took out these, added another Bushwhacker, added 2 more Targus commands, and I think I put... I don't remember what the last card was, but it's essentially the same list. Kavu's not terrible. But Endurance in here because Evoke can trigger Pelt Collector twice, but having this in the main board against all the graveyard strategies coming out is going to be very powerful. Reckless Bushwhacker, because Burning Tree into Bushwhacker on turn 2 is very powerful. But it's a lot of creatures. I'm going to tell you, it's a lot of creatures. It's got a very zoo feeling to it. And I know I've already done like two zoo deck lists so far, but it's really nice. Some lightning bolts for removal or extra damage. So you can just get a lot of different things out of this. You can ramp, you can deal damage, you can pump up, you can make it so they don't gain life. There are a lot of things this does, which is why I pumped it up to 4 in the final list. Then you have a bunch of different lands. Make sure that you get those different land types for Wild Nicodle on turn 2. And then your sideboard is very just generic card hate. The new cards are Kavu and Endurance, but it's a sweet list. Thrasta Storm is going to be probably one of the cringier decks, but also something that is really fun. It creates a lot of non-games of either you win immediately or lose immediately, but with Ignoble Hierarch, you're pumping up your own creatures. With Burning Tree Emissary, you're adding mana on turn 2. Hidden Herbalist, if you have fetch lands, you can activate this on turn 2. I almost want just to have like 4 Stomping Ground, and then the rest just be green or red fetch lands. Like get rid of Gorge, get rid of Forest, and just add in like 2 more Bloodstained Mires and add in like 4 Scalding Tarns or something, just so that you definitely have the Revolt on turn 2, because you need it. Because if you do that, let's say you turn 1 Ignoble Hierarch and then turn 2 Emissary into an Herbalist's, that's already 2 spells, and your Thrasta, which by the way I should probably explain, but your Thrasta will cost 6 less off of that, and you'll still have 2 floating mana. Thrasta is a 12 drop that costs 3 less to cast for each of the spell you've cast this turn. So you're trying to Storm out and then cast this. And then it has Trample, Haste, Trample over Planeswalkers, and Hexproof as long as it entered the battlefield this turn. And so you're trying to really get use out of that first hit. You really only need 2 hits before they're just dead, because they probably shocked, they probably fetched, they probably did all that. And so Thrasta is going to deal a lot of damage to them. And we do have ways of recurring Thrasta in case it doesn't kill them. But Ignoble Hierarch, having Exalted, also will pump up Thrasta. I considered adding in 4 Noble Hierarchs, but I just wanted to maximize the kinds of spells that replace themselves, mana-wise, card draw-wise, or just through just putting stuff back on top of the deck. So we have Gutshot as a Phyrexian spell to lower it by 3 mana without spending mana. We have Lava Dart, not exactly what we might be looking for, but if we cast this and then flashback, it's essentially 2 spells. So we do have 3 mana if we have Hierarch on turn 1. Then we have Lightning Bolts, just because that's even more damage, that if we have these, our pressure on Thrasta, it's not as much of we can't let Thrasta die, because we do have other ways of dealing damage. Then we have Mutagenic Growth. We would ideally use this to pump up Thrasta, but also it's something we can use to, like on our Ignoble Hierarch, for example, just to make sure that we can cast Thrasta. Next up is Noxious Revival. Put target card from a graveyard on top of its owner's library. Usually we'll use this for Thrasta when they kill it. Manamorphose is going to be add 2 mana of any combination of colors, draw a card. So this replaces itself and it draws a card. Valakut Awakening is acting as a land in this deck, but also acting as a way to filter through our deck in case we really need it. Then we have our lands, then we have some normal sideboard cards. Next up is Grief Rack, and so it's essentially the rack, okay, where you're trying to make your opponent discard as many cards as possible, and then have cards like the rack, which will make them lose life from having, for each card below 3 that they have in their they don't have in their hand. So if they have 3 cards in their hand, they'll take 0 damage. If they have 2 cards, they'll take 1. If they have 1 card, they'll take 2. If they have 0 cards in their hand, they'll take 3. And so that builds up very quickly. We have Ensnaring Bridges to prevent attacking. We have Davriel to add more damage. We have Liliana for discard. We have Ephemerate. And we have Ephemerate so we can flicker our Grief or Tide Hollow Sculler. We want both of those because they have their own shenanigans to pull. I think I already explained Tide Hollow Sculler in a different video. But the way this works is that when it enters, in response, you flicker it so that it's leaving the battlefield ability happens before you look at their hand. Because if you do that, then the first card you exile... the first card you exiled is actually exiled underneath Scholar, and then the second card you exile will be the original trigger that went on the stack that technically happens after the leave the battlefield ability. So one card, which will be the second card you pick, will actually just be permanently exiled. Then we have Ephemerate for flickering, Fatal Push for removal, Inquisition, Raven's Crime, Thoughtseize, Collective Brutality, and Wrenchbind for all discard spells, some nice land packages, and some sideboard cards, which I would love to go into more detail with these, but I have a lot of decks to share with you, and I'm going to be leaving the deck list in the description anyway. Solitude Sisters, it is our Soul Sister deck, dropping the infinite combo for some more removal and some Ephemerates, because this way we can just go ahead, flicker our Skyclave Apparition, and then we And if we do the same thing that we do with Tidal Scholar, they actually don't get that second token. But then we have, it's really essentially the same as my original Soul Sisters list, except it's no longer budget. It is one of the more budget lists at $500 of our video, but it's still not budget. But it's really bringing in Solitude because that is a very powerful card right now. I am really looking forward to seeing what different decks can play this. But then the sideboard hasn't really changed at all. It's just the inclusion of Solitude, and by doing that, I also wanted more removal so that I can make Flickering more valuable. Shaper Merfolk. I expect Merfolk is going to change a lot in the next few days, in the next few weeks. But this is a very nice card. Very nice card to add to the deck. I really might want some more Mist Callers in here if the graveyard synergies get more popular. But for now, I'll play Tide Shaper. I might just take out one of these other cards, like maybe a few Dismembers, a few Repeals, maybe a Forced Negation or two. But you definitely want Tide Shaper to turn their land into an island, so that all of your Island Walk lords over here just get that, just are able to be just extra powerful, because now instead of having to play Spreading Seas, you're playing a creature. My mind blanked there for some reason. But then we also have a Merfolk God that has Indestructible if you control other Merfolk, 2 others specifically. Whenever it attacks, you draw a card, and other Merfolk you control have Ward, which means that they are essentially protected, like if we had an Unsettled Mariner or something. Then we have Repeal for bouncing stuff, particularly the different Prowess decks and stuff like that, but we might end up not needing that anymore. Dismember to get rid of big creatures at instant speed, Force of Negation to get rid of combo decks. Aether Vial because it's a very powerful deck in a deck like this. And then we have a bunch of lands, but the addition is Minimo, School at Water's Edge, because you'll just play this, people won't pay attention to your mana base, and then they'll attack you, and then you'll untap your Sphylan, and then you'll just cheese them, you'll block them, and it allows you to block. It allows you to tack in and have a blocker. Next up is a deck I'm very excited about. Well, I'm excited about all of these, but Vampires is very close to my heart. This is going to be a deck that utilizes the new Bone Shards, and it's really the only new card, but it's a list that I recently just built of Bone Shards in here, because you can discard a creature or sack a creature. And so you can discard your Bloodghast, you can discard your Croak, so you can discard anything. Or you can sack anything. We are sacrificing deck. And then you can destroy anything. It is sorcery speed, but in this deck we don't really care. Fatal Push for more removal that is instant speed. Inquisition for discard. Collective Brutality as our own discard outlet. Like, imagine turn 2 Collective Brutality discarding like 2 Bloodghasts. That would be really nice. Getting all 3 effects off of that. And later we'll just play it back with Luris. Dismember as bigger removal. Nile Spellbomb as acting as a Mishra's Bauble, but it does require us to pay to draw that card, but it also has the side effect of exiling all cards from a player's graveyard, so it's going to get that extra power. But I love this creature package because we have Gifted Aetherborn as just a very powerful creature. The moment we put 1 counter on it, it's no longer boltable. Malakir is going to be a way that we can get rid of our opponent's big creature, because they're really... I feel like some decks are just heavily reliant on getting like 1 or 2 creatures out. Cordial Vampire, whenever a creature dies, whether it be ours or theirs, we get a counter on all of our vampires. Bloodghast is something that comes back essentially every turn. Viscera Seer is something that can sack anything instant speed. And so something that I've done in past lists is I play Viscera Seer with Bloodghasts in my graveyard. And let's say I have 4, right? 4 in my graveyard, I play a fetch land, return 4 to my battlefield, sacrifice all 4 of them to get 4 scries, fetch a card, and now the scries, if I'm fetching, don't really matter because I'm shuffling them away, but I can decide whether or not I want to activate the fetch land there. But there's a point to sacrificing them even if I'm going to fetch. But then you fetch and then get 4 more sacrifices. And the reason you would want to do that is because of Cordial Vampire. You get 8 counters from doing that. It's very powerful. You do get 4 scries post-shuffle or pre-shuffle if you decide not to fetch. It's a very powerful way to play this deck. And then we have Kroxa, which is going to be a way to make our opponent lose life, discard cards, or just run out of resources. And we can, if we have Lurrus on the battlefield, we can play this every single turn. And so I'm very excited. It is really the only red card. I do have Ingress Rampage as a way to kind of just deal with stuff our opponent is doing. But really, it's the only red card in the deck, and I don't regret it because it was a very nice addition. Our lands are pretty simple, just 4 of each of these, and I'm going to go ahead and move on here just so that we're not taking even longer. Our last deck is Cascade Foothills, which is something that I feel like it's going to explode because Living End decks and Crashing Foothills or Footfalls. I keep calling it Foothills. That's why it's called Foothills in the deck list. For whatever reason, I think it's Foothills. I think it's because of the land. But we have Bone Crushers. We have Brazen Borrowers because they are not 2-drops, but they are still essentially 2-drops for casting, just not for cascading. So you get your removal. You get your bouncing, you get all that jazz. You get non-basic lands or mountains, you get Seasoned Pyromancers, and you have Bloodbraid Elf to hit any of that, but you have Charlotte's Agent. And the reason why you don't want any 2-drops in your deck is because you want it to automatically hit Crashing Footfalls. And the reason why you want Footfalls to be there every single game is because getting 2 4/4s with Trample as well as your 2/2 that's on the board, the reason why this hasn't really been insane in the past is because people haven't had creatures that are cascaded. Creatures that cascade because we usually have Bloodbraid, and limiting ourselves to anything 4 or above in our deck is terrible. So if we limit ourselves to 3 and above in our deck, that's a lot more reasonable. And so Charlotte's Agent is going to be a way that we can constantly hit Footfalls and get those tokens. And if you are going against a Prowess style deck, 2 4/4 Rhinos puts a hard stop to that deck. Forced Negations, Protection, Violent Outburst to cascade even more, and then also Fire and Ice because it's technically a 4-drop. And so it's going to give us tapping, drawing, or damage. And then we have our lands, and then our sideboard is completely 3 or above. But we are cheating through Mystical Dispute to get a 1-drop possibly. We are looking at Sanctity and Void as our Graveyard and Hexproof because those are things we can do very early in the game but not have to worry about Cascade. Anger of the Gods is going to be a board wipe. Sadly, it would kill our... it would not kill our... Not sadly. Luckily, it would not kill our Bloodbraid Elf because it's a cast trigger. So the idea is if you Anger the Gods, kill the entire board, Bloodbraid Elf enters the battlefield, and you can swing in for free. Prismari Command, if there's any card in our deck that just isn't very good, we can bring these in. Because I like the idea of having 1 or 2 spots in your sideboard of if a card just isn't good against your opponent, like it's just bad, but you don't want to bring in specific hate, Prismari Command is more than enough to be able to help you there. Just having value in your sideboard. Anyway, I'm very excited for all of these decks. I'm excited to see what everyone is doing with the new set. If you have any ideas, let me know I almost said in the sideboard. That's what I'm gonna call my. That's gonna be what I call my comment section now. The sideboard. Let me know what you think of the new set. What decks are you excited to see? Did a deck here catch your eye? I'm going to put all the deck lists in the description. But for now, I'm going to go get some water because my throat is dry. And I will see you all later.